Senator Vance, in 2016, you called your running mate Donald Trump unfit for the nation's highest office, and you said he could be America's Hitler.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open. And sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump.
No. You guys don't understand. When JD Vance called Trump America's Schmittler, he didn't mean because it was a mistake. He meant it like by mistake. He absolutely meant what he said, and he said what he said. But today, let's make the case as to why JD Vance might need to scare you more than Donald Trump. And I think it's worth saying here that when we initially came up with the concept for this video, I thought that JD Vance would no longer be relevant by the time that I got an opportunity to record this, but alas, he has visited the Pope just yesterday, and the Pope then died within 24 hours. Now, I'm not saying JD Vance killed the Pope. I am not saying that JD Vance killed the Pope. What I am saying, though, is that I thought JD Vance would no longer be relevant. He's also been tweeting like that's his real job, talking about how due process is, we don't have time for due process. We should just deport everybody and do what we can, and then we'll worry about due process later. How else can we get everybody up out of this country? Things like that. So all that to say this, JD Vance still very much remains relevant, and I do miss the days when we didn't have to think about the president or the vice president. Those were good times when you didn't have to wake up every day and think, wow, what is the vice president and what are they doing today? Remember when they would just do their jobs and we didn't have to think about it or worry about it every day? In this video, I'm going to break down exactly who he is, what he stands for, and why I think he may hold the key to the future of the Trump movement. But first, thank you so much to everyone who watched my last video. I'm going all in on YouTube this year, so stay tuned for more deep dives and commentary from yours truly. To be fair, I want to start this video by saying that my favorite thing about JD Vance is probably, hold on, I'm finding it. Oh, the clip where Donald Trump said JD Vance is absolutely not going to be the next president of the United States.
Do you view Vice President JD Vance as your successor, the Republican nominee in 2028?
No.
But I do think the Heritage Foundation and billionaire Peter Thiel probably would like a word. They would want to step into the conversation, the group chat, because they are absolutely gunning for JD Vance, in my opinion, to be the next president, I fear. So let's go all the way back. Wait, rewind. When JD Vance first popped up on the scene, I was like, who? And then I started trying to figure out what he actually stands for, and somehow I was even more confused. When JD Vance first appeared on the scene, he even seemed like he had empathy, which, by the way, Elon Musk has publicly said is a weakness.
The fundamental weakness of Western civilization is empathy.
Coming from the same guy who went on TV mad that people laughed at him when his stocks tanked. But I digress. We got to get back to the topic at hand. One of the first things I remember about JD Vance was an interview with his law school classmate, a trans woman who is a part of the LGBTQIA community. And she shared their emails. And when they were talking back and forth, when they were classmates at Yale, he sounded empathetic, thoughtful, reflective, human. He sounded like he understood what she was going through and didn't like all the culture wars. And now I feel like he's completely, let's make people pissed off. Let's make people as angry as possible. And out of that anger, we're going to get elected. Because when you keep putting people down, when you keep making people feel like they're at the bottom of the barrel because of somebody else, that, as we've seen, wins elections. The question becomes, how do you go from that JD Vance, empathetic, understanding JD Vance, to someone who now seems to believe whatever the Heritage Foundation says he believes? If the Heritage Foundation told him to believe that the sky was pink, baby, he would say the sky was pink. At first, I thought maybe he doesn't really believe that extreme stuff. Maybe it's just political positioning, and maybe he's just acting out to hold on to power, and he'll say whatever needs to be said and do whatever needs to be done to keep power, which that really doesn't make anything better. But now I think he believes what he's talking about. He has definitely said he was radicalized. That's his word, not mine. JD Vance made a name for himself with his memoir, Hillbilly Elegy, where he talks about growing up in poverty in Middletown, Ohio and Jackson, Kentucky. It's giving flannel shirts, cowboy boots, and the book was praised hard by conservatives and tech bros. They loved it. What they saw was a raw, honest portrait of forgotten Americans. But you know who didn't love it? A lot of people from his actual hometown. Some people say that he sold them out and kind of repackaged their trauma as evidence that poor folks just need to try harder, y'all. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get a Yale degree, and let a billionaire fund your career. It's very simple. I'm confused as to what's not clicking. JD Vance was not born rich, but once he got to Silicon Valley, the money found him. That's where the money resides, and the money resides in his pockets. This is where we have to get into Peter Thiel, co-founder of PayPal, early investor in Facebook, and one of the most powerful, currently, I think, conservative power brokers alive. And Thiel has said that he doesn't want politics to be moderate or stable or even democratic, really. He can do without it. He wants it to be radical. He bankrolls fringe candidates, pushes anti-democratic ideals, and is one of the central figures behind national conservatism. And JD Vance is his guy, his ace boon coon, as we said back in the day, his twin in him. Peter Thiel gave JD Vance's campaign $15 million, but that $15 million was not a donation. This was a strategic investment. And what did JD Vance get in return? I don't know, just control of America. So you see him forming this kind of new right or new conservative movement with Vance and Thiel both deeply tied. What this can best be described as is a loose movement of tech elites, ideologues, and radical conservatives, all trying to burn down the federal government and build something in its place. I think what these individuals hit on is people are kind of tired of bureaucracy. You're tired of trying to get something done at the IRS or at the federal government level, and it takes you 3 years because there's so much red tape, there's so many rules and regulations, and you can't get anything done. People are seeing that we do have the Constitution, of course, which upholds the ideals and values of this nation, but some people on the right, I think, are hitting on something, which is the Constitution has to be kind of bent and wielded because it's not quite working for the modern day. Now, if you're on the left side of the aisle, you might think the same thing, but you don't like how the right side of the aisle is using it. When you have this kind of movement that hits on people being sick and tired of being sick and tired, people not being able to pay their bills, people tired of bureaucracy, people feeling like the government isn't doing anything for them. JD Vance and Thiel have been influenced by thinkers like Curtis Yarvin. Yes, Curtis Yarvin has entered the chat. That's a person who argues essentially that democracy is dead and we need a monarchy of competent elites. Do you see the pattern here?
I think that if you took any of the Fortune 500 CEOs, some of them are good, some of them are bad, but the overall quality, just pick one at random and put him or her in charge of Washington, and I think you'd get something much, much better than what's there.
Essentially consolidating the executive branch to have all of the power, right? I don't want you to check or balance me when I want to do what I want to do, essentially, is what I believe JD Vance and Donald Trump have said and what their belief is. And there's some journalists that I weigh really heavily what they have to say. And they've essentially said that they don't believe that Donald Trump and his administration consist of fascists, but they do think that this administration pushes hard against the establishment and what their power is. And they really want to push and bend the rules as far as possible and see what happens and see what they can do until the rules break. And I think to a certain extent, people like that. I think that what gets concerning for a lot of people is when you start hearing these calls to ignore the Supreme Court. For me, I'm like, this was all in Project 2025, as we talked about in the last video, consolidating power under the executive, getting people out of office, out of these positions that are elected, these judges positions, all of the above that are going to disagree with you and push back against what you have to say, get them out. And they believe Stephen Miller, JD Vance, all those individuals, all these kind of tech elites who have funneled all this money into the current administration completely believe that the executive should control everything. Peter Thiel in 2009 wrote, "I no longer believe that freedom and democracy are compatible." That's the guy who employed JD Vance, funded his business, funded his campaign, and helped groom him for national office. Now, we know that JD Vance converted to Catholicism as an adult and of course thinks that secular, so non-religious beliefs are destroying the country, but he's also said that universities are the enemy. He said that we need to completely replace the current ruling class because compromise is no longer possible, which is wild because is JD Vance not in the ruling class? And he's very recently said that the Supreme Court should not be able to rein in the president, citing Andrew Jackson for backup. So essentially, when the Supreme Court made a decision that Andrew Jackson didn't like, the story goes, stood in front of the Supreme Court and said that they have made their ruling, now let them enforce it. What does this mean? This is important. A lot of people are saying that the courts will rein in the president. If the courts order the president to do something or the executive to do something, they'll do it. Let's think for a second, because who has the enforcement power? The DOJ, the Department of Justice. Who runs the Department of Justice? Pam Bondi. Who nominated Pam Bondi to get in office and to have that position? Donald Trump. Pam Bondi is not doing anything that Donald Trump does not want her to do, point blank, period. Even if the Supreme Court orders the executive to do something. She recently wrote in a brief that it's up to the executive to discipline the executive. That's like me saying, oh, I did something wrong. So sorry, guys. I'm going to go punish myself. Maybe that's what some people do, but growing up like that, my mama did not play. So that said, what would a JD Vance presidency look like? We can look at how he operates now as vice president. Let's start with foreign policy. He recently called Chinese people peasants.
Borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture.
He suggested that the US should take over Greenland. He insulted European leaders at the Munich Security Conference. And domestic policy, well, he wants to dismantle the administrative state and replace it with something more, in his vision. I'm trying not to say authoritarian, because I know people get a little spooky, a little shook. The girls like to jump me when I say that, but I do think it's heading somewhere that I would not like it to head. But let's talk about why people like JD Vance as president, or why he got elected vice president along with Trump. Look at his debate performance. I personally thought that it lacked substance, but most viewers didn't care what he said, just how he said it. And that's showbiz, baby. JD Vance came off as composed, normal, measured, a smart, common sense guy from Ohio. I think that he could be the ideal candidate for people who want to move past a little bit of Donald Trump's chaos without changing the direction completely. He's engaging with people back and forth on Twitter, having these conversations, trying to make himself look like a man of the people and someone who will go back and forth with you. All right, so let's bring it back home about why JD Vance might need to scare you more than Trump, and why JD Vance might be scarier than Trump. Because yeah, I do think Trump is a little chaotic to me. I think he's a little bit louder. He's a little bit more boisterous. You kind of see him coming. I think you kind of know what's next. But JD Vance, I think his talking points do lack a certain je ne sais quoi, right? Other people rally behind him because they think he speaks just like a normal everyday person, right? And there's a chunk of America that desperately wants to return to normal. Politics as usual, suit and ties, handshakes and sound bites, which I don't think we're ever going to return to that time. But I think people kind of want that normalcy. They want to feel like they're just talking to a next door neighbor, a southern next door neighbor, a nice guy who believes in God, who believes in family values, who believes in all of these nice things. And though he might sound a little bit harsh around the edges, we just really believe in ultimately what he has to say. I am not saying that you need to think that way or that it even needs to make sense to you, but me being out on the road and talking to people, these are some of the things that people say that they want in a candidate. They're okay with the candidate cursing and talking realistically and talking about how they built this country with their bare hands because they think that's a real American. And I think that people on the left side of the aisle have an issue they're getting better now, but sounding kind of like robots and not sounding like real people. And I think that's different from what we had with Trump, because I think when Trump got in office, people wanted a shakeup, a complete shakeup of the government. And now people are getting it. And it's like, whoa, is this what we voted for? And I think, yeah, this is exactly what you voted for. So I do think a JD Vance presidency would kind of lull people back into like a sense of normalcy. Like, oh, wow, I'm glad we're done with all that craziness of the last presidency. And it would just literally be the same thing. He's really already shown that he'll say and do whatever it takes to get what he wants. He changed his viewpoints throughout his career, I think, to align with whatever viewpoint would get him into power and get him the most money. And the checks were cashed and are currently still cashing, right? He has billionaire backers, a roadmap from the Heritage Foundation, and a very real chance, I think, of becoming president.
No.
Even if Donald Trump doesn't think he's ready to be the next president. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that we get more viewers to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.